Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one, we're going to be looking at a free hit guide for game week 32. The same will apply for anyone free hitting later on in the season as well. But we're going to be looking at essentially what the free hit chip means, the kind of advantages, disadvantages that you can gain from using the chip. We'll also be looking at the template that is forming across the community, what I feel about that, and then finally some differentials to finish off. So hopefully you enjoy the content, guys, and you find it very useful. But let's jump into the first section first of all, which is just in general this chip strategy across, I think, what are very, very popular weeks to be looking at the free hit, which are game week 32 and game week 34 respectively. So the first point realistically is that it is going to be team dependent on who you've got playing for you. I think the first question you need to ask yourself really is how many players are enough? If you're happy that 7 to 10 players maybe are happy to navigate through blank game week 32 without having to use the free hit chip, maybe you can reach a very similar template to the free hit 32 or 34 using your 2 free transfers maybe, or maybe taking a -4 using 3 transfers. Maybe you've only got 1 free transfer and you want to take a -4, bringing your total players into that 7 to 10 range. Maybe it's worth holding on till a later stage. So just remember, if you do save the chip up until game week 34, the chances are you could probably expect a red arrow in game week 32. That's not to say that that's guaranteed. Of course, very, very template options may not always cover the overall effective ownership of many players. So, for example, Kieran Trippier, Harry Kane, there's a big debate about, do we play them both? Do we play one of them at all? So players like that could potentially still gain you rank over the free hitters. So it's not necessarily a guaranteed red arrow, but it is something to consider that is likely. And then your view essentially would be that you gain the ground back using the free hit in 34. So not necessarily an easy answer for this really, but hopefully that helps kind of you solve that problem for yourself in terms of the kind of the bullet points in front of us, right? But please do let me know in the comments below if you're sort of struggling with it, you're not sure, or you want me to take a look at your team, for example, and see how you can navigate it. More than happy to help. So feel free to do that in the comments. The next section then we'll just be talking about the key questions. So a couple of people have offline kind of been speaking to me about multiple things. I've had a few questions come my way. And one of the most popular questions seems to be, will you lose or gain value on your current players as normal? So if you hit the button, essentially, yes. If the price of the player does reduce or rise, even when you get that player back in game week 33, let's say we're going to free hit in 32, then you will still lose the value on that player. So the example I've used below here is Kieran Trippier. So we'll kind of just talk about that very, very briefly. If he's now 6.2 million, but does reduce to 6.1 million, if you sell him when he comes back into the squad on game week 33 for you, his value will be once again 6.1 million. He won't come back at 6.2, for example. So every single change in value of a player is concrete for that player throughout holding them. In terms of advantages and disadvantages, though, it's a little bit of a difference. There's kind of a few nuances in terms of the transfers. So we'll be looking at advantages in a bit more of a deep dive fashion in the next section. But one disadvantage I definitely want to make people aware of is when you hit the button, it's very, very similar situation to when you wildcard. If you've got players that you're not sure about keeping or selling at this point and you have value tied up in them. So what I mean by that is somebody that you've purchased at, say, 5 million, but then they've risen to, say, something like 5.6. You may want to keep hold of them for as long as possible. So try to keep them as the last transfers out for your drafts. And the reason for this is that we'll use Trippier as the example again. If you bought him at 5.6 million and he's now 6.2, that means you've gained 0.6 million overall in value. However, when you go to sell him, you will only gain an extra 0.1 for every 0.2 of rises. Therefore, his selling value is 5.9 million. So if you hit the button and you sold him, but then you later decided, you know what, I actually think I want to keep him because I think the effective ownership could hurt me. If you've already sold him at 5.9 million, you then need to repurchase him back at 6.2 million, effectively losing 0.3 million of budget in your squad for that particular free hit week. Now, of course, for a wild card, that's permanent. Once you lose that 0.3, you've lost it. It's not really the case with the free hit, but it's just something to bear in mind that if budgeting does become tight when you're selecting those new 15 players for this 1 week only, if you kind of, undecided on players like that, my advice is to don't sell them essentially until the very, very last minute or until the end of the deadline effectively. Then we'll be looking at the advantages. Now, again, we'll be talking about value. It's not necessarily too complex, but I do want to summarize it and just help people understand what you can do with a free hit or what you can do with wildcards. So basically, you can actually gain value by using chips like this. You can essentially wait for your players that you already own in your squad to actually continue to rise. Now, I haven't got a perfect example here, but let's take, for example, somebody that has risen since the previous deadline in John Stones. If he had risen twice by 0.1 and then 0.1 again on a second day, you would have actually gained an extra 0.1 sell value. Now, that's imperative later on because, it's not necessarily imperative, but if you're very, very tight on budget, that extra 0.1 can be gained. So hopefully that makes sense. Of course, if you then purchase a player before a price rise occurs as well, you can then, of course, sometimes also gain a few extra 0.1s later on in the week. So perfect example there is Martinelli is a very, very popular pick for this week with a favourable fixture against Southampton. He's risen in price by 0.1. So he's risen from 6.8 to 6.9 million since the deadline. And ultimately, if you press the button earlier, you would have been able to purchase him at 6.8 as opposed to spending 6.9 on him. So again, it just gives you that extra little bit of spending power, maybe elsewhere in your squad, the earlier you push the button. And as mentioned already, for every 0.2 million of price rising, you can sell for that extra 0.1. So the example here is, of course, Player X was purchased at 5 million on Sunday the 16th. On Monday the 17th of April, the price rises by 0.1. The price rises once again on Wednesday the 18th of April by 0.1. And now Player X becomes 5.2 million. Now, effectively, you might change your mind on this player. Maybe you have just gained that extra sort of value in your team on purpose because you couldn't quite stretch to that budgeting option that you wanted. So therefore you can then sell Player X for 5.1 million. Now, again, you've purchased at 5 million, you sell at 5.1. Now, luckily, I think for this free hit week, we don't need to worry so much about value. I think there are so many larger teams in City, in Manchester United and so on that are blanking. I'm finding it very difficult to actually spend above 100 million, let alone 101, 102, maybe even 103 for some team value. So this isn't necessarily as important for game week 32 or game week 34 this season, but it's certainly something to take into consideration for using the chip next season. So hopefully that makes sense. Now we can have a look again then at just showcasing what I mean by buying players early. So you can see Martinelli, there's the screenshot from the transfer page on the official FPL website in list view, showing you what the prices of the player are. Now, as you can see, I've already purchased Martinelli after hitting the free hit button, and this was the purchase price was at 6.8 million, but as you can see in the CP column on the far left, his current price is 6.9. So the later you leave the free hit chip to be activated, just be conscious that you may have to spend a little bit extra money to get the players that you want. Again, though, I don't really feel like this is too imperative for free hit 32. It's just for a wider understanding of the chip usage and how you can get those small advantages when using the chips. So moving into what I think and what I consider the template that seems to be forming. Now, I would say that when you're anything in terms of drafting phases, when you're looking at the beginning of the season, for example, when you look at wildcard drafts and similar for free hits, I think 9 times out of 10, most of us look for a spine of the team, right? We're looking for the core individuals that make up essentially the 100% almost starters in our lineups. Now, there could be a few question marks here on some people, but I would say in goal, we've pretty much got Johnston and Everson. You could mix that up. You could put somebody else even cheaper in that second goalkeeper position, knowing that Sam Johnston's probably going to be starting against Everton at home. But that being said, just in case anything happens, I do like having a playing goalkeeper at the cheapest possible rate that I feel could come in and still provide a clean sheet for me. So that pairing, I think, is very, very good. It's pretty optimal in terms of budget use as well for the 2 goalkeepers there. With the defenders, it's a little bit different. I think Trippier, of course, is definitely somebody that's up for debate. As mentioned, I've got a lot of value tied up in him, so I'm not too concerned about selling him so early on. I think later on, towards the end of the deadline, I may consider making a move for somebody else if I need to. But for now, I'm happy to keep him in my team. He's very, very high up on the XGI list for defenders. If not, I think he's second in the Premier League in total for chances created, just behind Kevin De Bruyne. And of course, he is on many set pieces, which helps that. But the chances that Newcastle gain from him is absolutely phenomenal. So I don't feel like the clean sheet is necessarily why you would keep Trippier or play him on this week specifically. So I think I'm comfortable in keeping him, but again, that is up for debate. We then have Trent Alexander-Arnold and Mark Gahey. Now, I think with Trent, the interesting thing is we've seen a slightly advanced role, of course, against Leeds on Monday night. Now, we know that they've got a very, very favourable fixture against Nottingham Forest at home. So that says Southampton, unfortunately, on the graphic, but it is Nottingham Forest they play at home. And I feel like with the chances that he also is able to generate, we know he's got a fantastic pass on him. We see him get 2 assists on Monday night against Leeds in that 6-1 win. So I think he's just going to continue on that trend, to be honest. Now, some of you may have already purchased him permanently as well, which I think is an absolute fantastic move. Ben Chilwell to him, I think, was a popular move for this week for free transfers, and also last week as well, even for -4s, which definitely paid off. So I think he is an absolute must-own asset for this Nottingham Forest game this week. We then have Mark Gahey, as mentioned. I think he's a budget option, right? At the end of the day, he's very, very cheap. Crystal Palace look like they're on the up with Roy Hodgson, and I think, again, he's possibly one that you could say is up for debate. He may not even make most starting 11s, but I think as bench cover, he is very, very strong in terms of the fixture and also the way Crystal Palace are currently playing. Then we have a look at the midfield, and we've got this trio of Saka, Salah and Martinelli. I think this is pretty much going to be core free hit, and I think you're going to find it very, very difficult to find drafts that don't include these three. There could be some arguments that Saka could potentially be moved to somebody else, but I just don't see the likes of anybody in the same price point of Bowen, let's say, maybe Maddison, someone of that ilk that can match what this man can potentially do. Now, he's been on the back end of a few difficult results in the past few weeks, right? We saw him benched against Leeds due to illness. He's then only scored us 1 point following that game in terms of a starting position. He then missed a penalty on Sunday, which meant that he also ended up on a 0-pointer, even though after playing 90 minutes and also getting, of course, that penalty. So the situation is that he can explode into an 18-pointer, as we've seen earlier in the season, but he can be as low as 1 point. So I think I'm going to stick with the Gunners. I think ultimately they are looking at closing in on the Premier League win for obviously what's been an absolute eternity for them. And I think we're going to see some real solidarity, especially against Southampton, that are a team at the bottom of the table, going to be struggling. I think it makes sense to have a minimum of 2 Arsenal attackers, and these two fit the bill perfectly, I think. On to Mo Salah then. I think he's really found his mojo once again. It's great to see him back into the mix of the goals. I think from an FPL point of view, just that is exactly what we want. Of course, he has missed a few penalties. We've had some debates on, sort of longer term. Is he the better option to Harry Kane, for example? We've had debates like that on this channel already, but I genuinely think that not only for the free hit, but longer term as well, from 34 onwards, this is a man that we're going to want in our teams, if not the captain shout of this week. So there's 3 absolute core assets I think are unnegotiable in that midfield. And then finally, in my opinion, the actual only striker that is a must-own at this stage is Ollie Watkins. The man has just come on the back of a 16-pointer in game week 31, absolutely looking really, really good under Emery, to be honest. I mean, when I watched the game, there was some talk, obviously, in the build-up of the match as well, from all the pundits about how Emery and the Villa team have got him looking at how Edison Cavani used to make his movements and so on. And I think it's really benefiting what Ollie Watkins is trying to achieve. He stays within the confines of the box in terms of where he runs. He doesn't go out wide as much anymore. And I think he's really benefiting from that very, very sort of simple management that maybe someone like Steven Gerrard just couldn't provide him, or Steven Gerrard's team couldn't provide him. So I think we're really starting to see the best of this man. And I think he absolutely becomes an unnegotiable once again as part of this template. So let me know in the comments below if you feel like I've missed any player off. But I think this in terms of the crux and the core of what our teams will end up looking like if we do press the button, I think this is going to look a lot like that. Then I've got a couple of different options in terms of nuances, let's say, to that lineup. We've got a few different combinations that we can talk about. Now, I think, first of all, we'll just talk about the defender that's in that kind of question mark, 4 to 5 million defender slot. I think categorically most people are going to be looking at a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3 formation, meaning that the fourth defender in, let's say, Mark Gahey is bench cover. Your then fifth defender, I don't think is going to be coming into play for many people. Now, personally, I think I'm sat currently on Dawson from Wolves that's playing Leicester away, and he's the third bench option. I find it very, very hard to believe that we're going to need to go that far into our bench, which is why I've just decided 4 to 5 million is a price range that you can happily spend on that defender and just have them as the third bench option. Interestingly, I've actually gone as a slight differential pick, but somebody that really did impress me on the eye test and the statistics of late is Alex Moreno. Now, he is somebody that's pretty much kept Luca Digne out of the team so far, and you can see that he's really impressing once again under Emery. He's brought him to the club, and I just think his attacking threat, he looked so threatening in the box. Now, of course, this is an away match. I watched a home game at the weekend against Newcastle, but to see what he was producing and, of course, coming away with an attacking return as well as a bonus point, I think it was last week, I think he's definitely in the mix to being one of my starters in this lineup, to be honest, especially now after seeing the 6-1 defeat of Leeds to Liverpool. My original plans was maybe to go for someone like Trent and Robertson as a double up in defence, but I actually feel like there could still be a conceded goal maybe, even against the likes of Nottingham Forest for Liverpool. So potentially Robertson isn't the play. He's very expensive anyway, so maybe you want to move the funds elsewhere, but ultimately I do believe that Alex Moreno is a very, very strong pick from a differential point of view. So I may end up going with a back three of Trent, Alex Moreno and Kieran Trippier. In terms of the 5 in the midfield then, I think it's going to be an interesting topic on who we choose in terms of either a midfielder or we look at the 3 strikers. Now, I've seen a couple of different kind of creators talking about different options. In this scenario, you'd probably be looking at playing all 5 of these midfielders ahead of maybe someone like Solanke gets benched. Maybe there's a closer debate than at first glance between Eze and Solanke, but you've got a couple of options here. But I really do like Palace from an attacking point of view at the moment. I mentioned them as differentials in my live stream last week, and of course Eze has produced a great number of returns since Roy Hodgson has taken charge once again, and I think that may continue. Everton are a very difficult side to break down, typical of course of Sean Dyche teams anyway, but I think at home Palace should gain ground here, and I feel like he's potentially a great differential option and a great, obviously, budget option in midfield. We've already spoken about the 3 guys there of Saka, Salah and Martinelli, so then it's on to Gakpo. Now, he was involved in multiple goals of that 6-1 victory for Leeds United. I think ultimately, if he does keep Darwin Núñez out of the team and that front three of Jota, Salah and Gakpo is the starting lineup, it's potentially could be very, very explosive for these two. I don't necessarily feel like Darwin Núñez gets a start, but absolutely, if Jota keeps him out of the team, then I think these 3, they really look like they were ticking. So it kind of looked like what a Liverpool or a Klopp front 3 should have been looking like for a long time. Of course, you could still see that he's maybe a minute's risk, maybe he doesn't get any returns, and he is subbed from a 60-minute mark. We've, of course, got the return of Luis Diaz. We have Bobby Firmino as well. There are definitely situations where he doesn't get the full minutes. But I think at this point, I prefer 2 Liverpool attackers as opposed to 2 Liverpool defenders. Then moving into the strikers, of course, we've already spoken about Watkins. But Dominic Solanke is somebody that's just keeps on giving at the moment. His statistics are very, very strong. His numbers are really, really good as well to essentially back that up. And of course, his output from an FPL point of view has just gone from strength to strength recently. At home especially, Bournemouth seem to be doing very, very well. And this is obviously a very, very tight battle at the bottom. So maybe both teams just shut up shop and look to play for a point. But I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see Bournemouth try to get as many points as possible on the board. And when you're playing teams in and amongst you in terms of a relegation fight, you really need to be going for the wins, right? So I think Dominic Solanke could definitely put out some returns here against West Ham, and that's why I think I've selected him in this option. And then, of course, finally, Gabriel Jesus is the second striker and the final player of the 15 to talk about here. I do think, like I said, an Arsenal triple up makes more sense to me than looking at a defensive option for them. I do like Ben White for what it's worth. I think he's obviously been involved in much more on the right-hand side. He's actually finding himself in a more progressive role than Bukayo Saka from time to time now. And that just could be that the tactics of the managers that are playing Arsenal are saying that they need to isolate Saka as the creative player on that right-hand side. And effectively that's then giving more freedom to Ben White as there's not so much man marking for him. I don't really know, but certainly from an eye test perspective, he seems to be running very, very well and progressively forward. So maybe something to think about. But at this present time, even with Jesus possibly only playing 60 to 70 minutes, maybe getting substituted with a Trossard sub, for example, or Reece Nelson we've seen come on, for example, while Eddie Nketiah is injured, I still feel like he's going to produce the business. He's just done such good work for Arsenal since his return already that I think they're just going to be on a more upward trajectory. And he's been in this position before as a Manchester City player. He knows what it's like when you're under pressure from other clubs trying to challenge you from a title perspective. I think he's going to keep his head, and I think he's going to slot home a couple of attacking returns against this Southampton squad. So that's where my head's at for this kind of draft, I suppose you could say, or possibilities. We've then got a slightly different nuance to this where it's more of a focus on a 3-4-3. So as mentioned, Robertson was always in my thinking previous, and maybe you do feel like the Liverpool sort of double up, I suppose, from their wing backs is 100% the way to go. And if that's the case, that frees up an attacking slot for somebody else. Now, I feel like if you didn't go with Cody Gakpo, Odegaard definitely does fit the bill. That triple up in Arsenal midfield, we've seen how essentially the points have been shared across most of these guys, right? They're top of the table. They are, of course, all hungry to achieve success. And you can see that from an FPL point of view as well. They are returning consistently, maybe some others than not, like we mentioned. Saka's obviously had a few bad weeks. Odegaard has had a few dips in between. Martinelli went through a bit of a dry patch post-World Cup, but he seems to be back to his best. So I think this also makes sense where you don't look at Gabriel Jesus, but you look at this four-man midfield instead of Saka, Salah, Martinelli and Odegaard. You then look at the three strikers and you've got, of course, Harry Kane and Ivan Toney coming into the mix. Now, my only concern about these two individuals, especially Ivan Toney, is Aston Villa have only conceded one goal in their last 4 matches. They seem to have really shut up shop very well under this Emery system. And I do agree that absolutely playing at home, Brentford are a bit more of a different beast than they are from an away point of view. So Toney could absolutely do some damage here. And that's why maybe Moreno is a bit of a risky pick. But I think that Villa will be able to shut them out. There's this top 6, obviously, debacle now between Brighton, Villa and Brentford that are all in that mix. And I think this is going to be a very intense game. And it's going to mean quite a lot to both clubs to be able to get this win. So yes, you could say from an attacking point of view, Watkins and Toney double up makes a real good sense for what we think the game might end up being, but I'm just not so sure. Of course, with Harry Kane, Newcastle have been one of the best defences in the league, not necessarily of recent, which is why I can understand why people would want to get on board with Kane as an attacker. But realistically, I still feel like it's a very tricky fixture for him to navigate. It's at St James's Park as well. We've seen what Newcastle can do at home. I do feel like, talking about different beasts, they certainly are a lot more solid, I think, from a home perspective. And then, of course, really the midfielder slot just becomes essentially the bench option of Andreas against Leeds. I think he could potentially be even played ahead of someone like Ivan Toney or Harry Kane in this version of the draft. But as you can see, I've just given examples here really of the fill in the blanks. I think the core template, as shared earlier in the video, will probably be in existence for most drafts. It's just a case then of filling in, like I say, the blanks and the kind of missing players here. So hopefully those drafts give you an idea or some kind of help on what you might want to do. And finally, then we'll be talking about differentials. We've got defensive midfielder and forward differentials. I haven't included goalkeepers as I really don't feel that you can gain so much from a differential point of view from goalkeepers. Their ceiling is very, very similar. We look for 6 points plus save points plus a potential bonus or 2 as a maximum. So maybe a 10-pointer is something that you can kind of aspire to when you look at a goalkeeper from a points perspective. However, defenders, midfielders and forwards can definitely overall offer much more, I guess, opportunity, shall we say. So in defence then, we've got Alex Moreno, we've got Pedro Porro and we have Kurt Zouma. Now, all of these individuals are very low ownership. We can see 2.1% for Alex Moreno. 1.1% for Pedro Porro, and 1.5% for Kurt Zouma. I absolutely think that Pedro Porro is one of those riskier picks. I'm not sure that Tottenham would keep a clean sheet, but in terms of expected goal involvement, all three of these pretty much hit at least the number one, essentially, so 1.0 or above in terms of their expected goal involvement over the last 4 matches. So we know that Bournemouth, from a set-piece perspective, haven't always been the best in terms of their defensive output. Zouma, we know from a set-piece perspective, is very good at attacking those. So I can definitely see maybe an attacking return as opposed to a clean sheet there. Of course, again, Pedro Porro from an attacking point of view, more so than a clean sheet perspective. But I actually think the Moreno's probably got the best of both worlds, where I think that defensively Villa are much more compact and much more sound now. That Konsa and Mings relationship seems to be blossoming even more. And of course, with Emi Martinez in goal as well, I just feel like the clean sheet potential is a lot higher for that Aston Villa side, hence why he was in one of my initial drafts. And of course, his attacking output as well just seems to be there. It's on the money at the moment, and he's certainly returning. As we look into the midfield, then we've already spoken about a couple of individuals in Eze and Gakpo. Their ownerships are a little bit higher than some here at 4.2% and 5.4% respectively. But there are 2 others I want to talk about here in Elise, who is a bit of a set-piece taker. He does tend to take some free kicks. His set-piece delivery and kind of crossing sort of prowess, if you like, as well, is very, very strong. I think as a number 7 at Palace, he's done a phenomenal job at such a young age. And I think, to be honest, at 3.5% ownership, he's got definite potential to return on a differential level. Of course, then we do have Jared Bowen, scored a wonderful goal against Arsenal at the weekend. And of course, Bournemouth away being just one of those fixtures that definitely looks favourable on paper. I'm not sure I would trust West Ham long term between now and the end of the season based on fixtures and where they are in the league. And just in general, it's a little bit tricky to navigate when teams have got stuff to play for on who the best assets will be. But at 3.5% for a 1-week punt, essentially as part of a free hit, I can definitely get on board with that. So if money's not really an issue, you're looking at a 5-man midfield, maybe Bowen fits the bill for you. And then, of course, the forwards here. We've spoken about Solanke already. I do like Isak. I've mentioned him in previous videos as well before. My only concern with him is maybe the minutes. Maybe he does share that time with Callum Wilson. We have seen them both on the pitch at the same time, but it does look like Eddie Howe prefers to do that later on in the match, maybe to put it to bed, maybe to give a new dynamic to the squad and the team on the pitch, not necessarily something that he lines up with at the beginning of the match, which could potentially cause a problem. So take what you will from that, I guess. Iheanacho is somebody that, yes, he's 1.1% owned, and he potentially against Wolves at home, it looks like a great fixture on paper. But Wolves have certainly been a team on the up from a defensive point of view, and also Leicester have been on the decline from an attacking point of view, right? So it's kind of very difficult for me to get on board with him as a true differential to select, but some people no doubt will be looking at him as that possible option. And then finally, as we've just spoken about with the triple Liverpool assets, Diogo Jota is definitely somebody that's on my radar as well. I mean, he's currently only 0.8% owned. And against Nottingham Forest at home, what better way to celebrate a brace from your previous game and go into essentially what should be, I imagine, the starting lineup once again. But, you know, if you're a Liverpool supporter and you think there will be rotation this weekend, please do let me know, because I think actually getting the right assets for Arsenal and Liverpool are going to be swinging this week very, very significantly. So that's going to wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you found it useful. I know it's a little bit more long-winded than usual, something I've not really done before. Bit of a sort of template guide / kind of chip usage guide as well. But hopefully, again, you found value in the content. If you did, then please do consider liking the content. Of course, I provide this content completely free of charge, and that is the easiest way to support the channel, as well, of course, as hitting that subscribe button to be notified of all future content that I create on the channel. I will be doing a free hit team selection at some point this week before the deadline, and of course I will be doing a deadline stream on Friday night. So looking forward to seeing you there, guys, or in the next video. Thanks very much for tuning in and watching this one, and I will see you in another video soon. Take care.